Vahoaka fa ty misy zavatra kely mba hipoaka. Anaovana azafady aminareo vahoaka ty misy resaka kely tiana boka.
C'est la Louisiane, et j'y vais à l'école ici. Ils sont partis.
Tsisy fiovany.
Ils sont partis.
Anderaka ny miaino ianao mitaraina fa ny atao maly tonendro aniany. Tsisy fiovany mila hankalao fiainanao firy taon'izao. Mifoanao maraina ka mamalaindaina de misasa tavo avy amanotsamba misotro kafe lasa indray mandeha amonjy ny fiasana terapia-ingana bus tangy rehefa mandany vola ny takisiby andofire makabiena salamizany fona salamizany fona. Andri zay odina amonjy fandrina rehefa tonga antrano rehefa mbatsima mora matony ankizy tsy resany akory voky eo izy avy de matony sala amizany fona de sala amizany fona ariky tsy zany va arinany zany eky tsy zany va arinany zany vereny kely le mandeha avereny kely le mandeha vereny kely le mandeha. Na pesana na rifiravana na sanao miavusi lozanao mifusa papakisionera pesa penilera timirara fa mene fandemo tungi dai ne riva tu zeni chiuzi si afalina na chacha mifufa manenu lava si mangeto baba zara heta rita devo kita salam zan fone salam zan fone salam zan fone sanam salam zan fone. Zanva, Arna Zayak, Zanva, Arna Averin Killemade, Averin Killemade, Averin Killemade. Wana zafady aminare vahoaka, ty misy resaka kely tiana boka. Salam zan fona salam zan fona salam zan fona salam zan fona.
Hello, everybody. I never know how to start these things. I'm trying to cultivate an on-air personality, and I want to start the show with some enthusiasm. Coming at you. Yeah, I don't know, but I'm excited about this week's episode, folks. You know, this is a guest that I've been waiting to have on for a while, Dr. Christopher Ryan. As most of you who listen to this show know, is the reason I got into podcasting in the first place. He hosts the show Tangentially Speaking. Chris is for the three of you who've been living under a rock for the past 5 years, he's the author of the 2010, I believe, bestseller Sex at Dawn, that challenges some of the long-held beliefs about human sexuality and monogamy and the function of human sexuality through different cultural paradigms, both currently in the world and going all the way back to our hunter-gatherer roots and before. His work dovetails with my work on Paleolithic and early human religion. Indeed, the further you go back, human sexuality and religion and religious thinking are almost synonymous with one another, since, after all, religion is about metaphors of becoming and emergence and transformation. Human sexuality in many ways is the primary way that we as people interact with that energy and express it and share it with one another. So I had Chris out. Listen to me like I'm in charge of anything. We had Chris come to the school where I teach, Mount Hood Community College, in 2013 to speak with our students about his book, about Sex at Dawn, and about the work he's doing. And it was a great event. Those of you that listen to Tangentially Speaking, you know Chris to be a brilliant guy, as I call him, a big idea guy. And he's irreverent, he's funny, he knows a lot of interesting people. He's traveled the world a lot, and so he brings a lot to the table that make him to make him a compelling guest. What some of you might not know about Chris is the generosity that the man displays, the genuine human kindness that comes out of him. He had me on his show, and I was kind of a nervous, fidgety English teacher, and he had me as a guest on his show, which was incredibly kind as it was. And apparently, even though I legendarily now made a mistake and kept referring to cuneiform as Sanskrit, I was so nervous that first episode. And later on Duncan Trussell's website, I was reading through some of the comments on something else entirely, and somebody brought that up. Somebody said, hey, that Gurvich guy, was pretty smart on Ryan's podcast. And then somebody immediately said, yeah, I don't listen to anything that guy says. You confuse Sanskrit with cuneiform. He's a charlatan, a fraud. And I said, oh, shit, they're on to me. But anyway, barring that, Chris's audience, and even that person called me out for fucking up. It was cool. But Chris's audience was always just incredibly kind with me. When I was putting together some funds to try to make it into the PhD program down at CIIS, I got some support, financial and otherwise, from folks in Chris's audience. When I had the idea to start my own show, a lot of folks from Chris's audience were very encouraging and listened to the show and gave me good feedback on how to get my program off the air. Chris has had me on as a guest on his show 3 or 4 times, I think, over the years, and as a co-host for some great episodes with Peter Boghossian and Dennis McKenna and a few others. So I guess what I'm saying is that with all of the intelligence and with all of the irreverence and with all of the discussion about monkey balls and polyamory and all the rest, Chris is really a guy that I think distinguishes himself through his compassion, through his kindness, through his genuine interest in people and their stories. I really thought when I was on the show, I got a lot of confidence from my appearance, and I thought, God, I'm an interesting dude. Look, this worldly celebrity thinks my story is fascinating, and that's really something. And then, of course, I listened to more Tangentially Speaking, and I realized he thinks that about all of his guests, right? But that's cool, right? Here's a guy who's genuinely interested in all of the ways human beings navigate the world and find meaning and make meaning in the world. So get yourself over to Tangentially Speaking if you haven't, and check out the wonderful work Chris is doing. He has moved on from Sex at Dawn and is working on a new book now, Civilized to Death. When I think of civilization, here we are using the internet, using this modern technology to make this show and put it out on the air. And so a lot has come from civilization, a lot of toys that we like using. But it was Freud who said the liberty of the individual is no gift of civilization. It was the greatest before there was any civilization. And Chris's new book is really looking at this 7,000, 8,000, 10,000 year project of civilization to really, just like he did with human sexuality, to really ask the question and look at the evidence. Has it been worth it? I think the answer is no for over 3/4 of our planet. And I think Chris details that. But even for the so-called winners of this civilization game, it seems to be kind of zero-sum, right? For what is taken from us, from the world, from nature, from the spiritual, what we get back in return is not sustainable and doesn't seem to be worth it. So I think it's a fascinating book. I can't wait for it to come out, and I hope you all read it. I think it is going to cement Chris, as we talk about in this interview, as like a Malcolm Gladwell kind of guy, or a Michael Pollan, or these others who write books about big ideas and who see the world in ways that can benefit all of us, can help maybe drop the scales from our eyes and to help us see things anew and start working together to create a better future for ourselves. And again, I just can't say enough, along with all of those big ideas, come a guy that is a compassionate person, an engaged person, an accessible person, and one who really is interested in building bonds of empathy and connectivity across the world and across these various lines and codes that tend to keep us divided. This episode is a unique one. The first hour of it is actually over on Chris's show, Tangentially Speaking. And then the second, the finality of the program, forgetting how to talk here at the moment. The end of the show, the stunning finale, the final 2 hours is here at On the Block. So if you haven't listened to the first hour yet, go on over to Tangentially Speaking and check it out. We'll wait. All right, for those of you that are still here, apparently you've heard the first hour, and if not, you don't necessarily need to listen to them in order, but there's some jokes and some reference that you might not get until you have. One last announcement, we are creeping the show. We're on iTunes. As I said, you can catch us on SoundCloud as well, on our website, ontheblockradio.com, and we're starting to have our YouTube channel presence as well. We're starting to put previous episodes up there, and we'll be having new episodes up there in the future. So extending the reach of the show and the accessibility of it. Find us at ontheblockradio.com, Facebook and Twitter. Interact with us, what you think about this show, previous shows, future guests, and the like. We appreciate having you here, folks. The hashtag Listen, Engage, Transform is the motto of the show. Chris is a guy that, as our other guests have, really models this notion of transformation, especially in looking at the ways that we've built these social relationships over the past 10,000 years. An important conversation, a funny conversation, I hope, at least on his end, and one that I think you will find as engaging as we did. All right, folks, we'll see you on the other side. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to On the Block with Andrew Gurovich, a podcast about authentic people doing beautiful things. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the show, folks. We are here in the lair of Chris Ryan. This is Andy Gurovich, and welcome to the show, man.
Thanks. It's great
to
be here.
We just finished hour one over on Tangentially Speaking. You have a podcast, is that correct?
Yeah, I have a little budding podcast.
What episode number are you on?
I think we're on 150 something at this point.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Do you enjoy doing the show? I mean, where does it fit into your life?
No, I do enjoy it. I enjoy it a lot. I'm a little frustrated because I wish I had a little more time to put into it. Man. You know, like sometimes I think like, oh, I want to like go back and listen to some music that would fit in here really nicely, or, you know, I could fade this in and fade that out and like be a little more artful about it. Not a lot, but a little more.
A little more, yeah.
And I'd love to have more time to chase down interesting guests, and, you know, because that's a lot of emails and set it up, and, you know, are we going to be in the same town at some point? Because I prefer to do them in person when it's possible. Yeah. So I like it. It doesn't feel like work at all. It feels fun, like a fun hobby. Yeah. And I really like the engagement with the audience I get. You know, I get a lot of really touching, beautiful emails from people, ranging from just, you know, like an hour ago I got one from a guy who lives in Alaska, and, you know, he's like, hey, I listen to your podcast, and you know, you inspired me. I bought a van, and you know, I drove to Baja, and, you know, like, thanks, I wouldn't have done it, you know. Cool. So like that kind of thing, ranging from that to, you know, the sort of heartbreakers of somebody you know, saying, you know, I live in a town, and some little town somewhere, and like there's nobody like me here. There's nobody who thinks about these things. There's nobody who, talks about these kind of things. And I thought I was really fucked up. And then I listened to you and your guests, and I realized, like, wow, there are people like me out there.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and it's beautiful.
For listeners to this show, to On the Block, they might not be for tangentially speaking listeners. I'm sure they know this story, but do you mind quickly, or not quickly, telling the story about that time here in Portland when someone left that letter on your car? You did a short episode about it.
Yeah.
It was really quite moving.
Yeah, that... I haven't thought about that in a while. The letter was... Someone, I guess, had heard me... I go off on rants a lot, and I had been ranting about how fucked up American culture was in regards to more death and how people die, and how the medical system is sort of oriented toward fighting against death at all costs, as opposed to allowing people to die with dignity, and death is always a defeat, and we've got to, and you even hear it in the way, so and so, lost a long battle with cancer. He went down swinging, and I'm gonna fight this thing. You know what? If you have pancreatic cancer, you're not gonna fight that thing. There's some things. I often think about that. What's his name? The Welsh poet who died young. There's a famous poem where he says, "Don't."
Dylan Thomas.
Dylan Thomas. I kept thinking Dylan. Don't go gentle into the good. Rage against the dying of the light.
When I was like 19, I was all about that.
I mean, I think about that. It's like, well, why are you raging against the dying of the light?
It's such a Western. It's such a uniquely Western idea.
It's childish. It's silly. Anyway, so I was ranting, saying this sort of bullshit, and someone who heard it left a note on my car. And basically the letter was about this person. I don't know if it was a man or a woman, but it was about how this person's mother died, and how, let's just assume it was a son. And so he had a pact with his mother, and they had a very close relationship, and they talked about, well, what if you get Alzheimer's, and what if this happens and that happens? And they sort of had a deal, an understanding that he wouldn't allow her to descend into, dementia. And it was a really intense letter, because essentially what he described was how he killed her in a nursing home, and it was her final days, and he had
to do it on the DL, right?
Oh of course.
Because they don't have assisted suicide in this state, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, they do actually in Oregon, I think, but it's extremely, there have to be 3 different doctors who are all...
Oh, this was a person that lives in Oregon?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Okay. And I don't know how long ago it happened. There was no identifying information, and I burned the letter immediately because I thought, if anyone decides to try to prosecute this person, there's no evidence. But it was really moving and beautiful, and it made me think about, how, like, if you have a dog who is obviously dying, there are drugs that the vet will give the dog so it can die peacefully.
Yeah, we call it being humane.
Exactly. But you can't do that with people.
Do the humane thing for the dog. Yeah. Although if you're a human, you're fucked. You're going to lay there and suffer.
You can't be canine.
Until your insurance runs out. Yeah. No kidding. But that's moving, right? I mean, to do a show that, again, like you said, you're sitting here and you put your rant down in tape and then put it out in the world, and it hits a person in life experience in a way that you couldn't have even imagined.
Yeah, and then they felt like, okay, here's someone who's willing to entertain this idea, and they've got a platform, and they found a way to get this note to me anonymously, and yeah, that was a special episode. And I've been, the last couple times I was on Rogan's show, I was talking about pedophiles, and talking about how pedophilia, from a scientific perspective, is much more sexual orientation than it is, just a bad person.
Yeah.
And most people who have these feelings have them because they themselves were, had a sexual experience when they were a child. So there are these associations that are made, and
it's a kind of imprint. Huh?
It's an imprint, yeah. And so it's the wrong way to approach it to refuse to allow them to talk about this with a therapist, right? Like in a lot of states, that would be
it'd be turned in.
Yeah, it triggers all sorts of legal stuff. Exactly. And so it's it's the way we approach things. There are these problems in society, and we think we're eliminating the problem by eliminating conversation about it.
Yeah.
And so I talked about that on Rogan's show and talked about how there's a big difference between a pedophile and a pederast. A pedophile is attracted to children.
Yeah.
A pederast does things with children.
Right.
Being a pedophile is not immoral. It's not illegal. You've got desires. And I get emails from people after talking about that saying, that's me, man. I have these desires. I don't ever want to act on them. I know it's wrong. I don't ever want to do that. I hate that part of myself.
And there's nobody they can tell.
And there's nobody I can talk to about it. Yeah. So we isolate them. We make them feel weak. We make them feel as if, it's like the disease model of addiction.
Yeah.
I think it's bullshit. It undermines the capacity of people to say, okay, I want to get shit faced out of my mind, but I'm not going to do it.
Right.
That's my decision. Well, if you tell them it's a disease they have no control over, then they don't.
And then they're also off the hook.
Yeah,
of any kind of personal accountability.
Anyway, so it's just a cool thing. I think podcasts are amazing because there's nothing between this little machine we're talking into and the audience.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Before we get off of that topic, I heard Louis C.K. on Howard Stern recently, and he was talking about... I really like Louis, and one of the things I appreciate, I'm going to go on a limb and say I like Louis C.K. along with every other fucking...
I've never heard anyone else who likes Louis
Yeah, exactly.
CK.
I have obscure taste, man.
Yeah. Do you like Thai food, too?
Yeah, exactly. Also, titties. Love them. Yeah.
Can you say that on your podcast?
Well, we'll edit that out later. Anyway... Louis, if I could say that, I probably can't say what Louis C.K. said, but he said he realized one day that if we could, that most pedophiles, when they act on it, they end up killing the child, right? Because it's such a horrible thing to do. When we catch them, everyone hates pedophiles, and we'll put them in jail, and they're going to rape you in jail, right? It's such a fucked up thing that once a person breaks down and actually acts on that impulse, they're like, I got to kill this kid. I can't let him go home. And so Louis goes, if we could all just figure out a way to hate pedophilia just a little less, we might save some kids' lives, right? And then he goes, I don't know what to do with this information, though, right? And it's fucked up, and it's not funny. And he did that on SNL, and people are like,
I remember that.
Yeah, it's a real problem. And all of the groups write letters, and you can't make fun of this. And little disclosure for our audience: I was molested as a child. Not that I feel like that gives me a right to be insensitive, but what it does is it forces the conversation. And I think comedy is a unique place to do that, because when we laugh at something, it kind of makes it takes a little power from it. It makes it a little safer too. We can bring it a little closer when we laugh at it, right? And so that uncomfortable thing we can deal with, we can laugh through it together and actually have a dialogue. And so I think there's actually merit in comedians like that, even when they're just being sick.
Yeah.
Fighting back against
anyone
this, we
trying
can't
to
talk about anything. Yeah,
not at all. And I think, and it's sort of a similar or parallel conversation, I think, comedy and podcasts. Because for me, of course, they're all different kinds of podcasts, and I don't mean to proselytize about podcasts, but I know yours is sort of getting off the ground. And I think it's a really important thing because, as you say, comedy is one area where anything goes, and podcasts are another area
where anything goes,
it can. If that's what your niche is,
right.
You can talk about anything. There's no sponsor who's going to pull the plug. There's no government censor looking over your shoulder. Not yet, anyway.
Yeah, right.
It's global, right? My podcast, the hosting service has this world map.
Yeah.
And I can click on countries and see how many downloads there are in that country for each episode and all that. There are people in Mongolia who download my podcast.
That's cool.
Fucking Mongolia, Ecuador, hundreds of people in Ecuador. what the fuck? Who's listening to my podcast in Ecuador of me sitting in this room that we're in right now in Portland, Oregon, and an hour after I click those buttons, someone in Ecuador is listening to that.
Just downloads the show.
That's powerful.
On the Block radio as one listener in Gabon.
There you
we
go.
have the same metrics, right? So I figured that out the other day, and we're in like 18 countries. There's like 3 people in each of those countries, but
Isn't it crazy?
Yeah,
and
it's
how did somebody in Gabon hear about your show that's only been out a few weeks at this point?
Yeah, about 8 weeks.
It's fucking crazy.
They're probably going to send me an email telling me that I've won $8 million, and if I just send my
it's the
bank
Prince of
information.
Gabon.
Yeah, exactly. He's got a special wire transfer for me. We're working it out now.
I don't know.
Don't worry
is
about
that
it.
racist?
Yeah, that's how I'm coming to Spain next year with my $6 million check. That I'm
Oh, great! That's going to be great when that comes through.
So I guess we'll do it on Skype. Yeah. So you've been doing this for a few years now, right?
Yeah.
When did it start?
It started when I did Duncan's show.
Okay.
I was still living in Spain, and I got an email from some comedian in L.A. Who said he had a podcast, and next time I'm in L.A., he'd love to. He'd read Sex at Dawn and wanted to, hook up. And I thought, well, I like comedians. Never heard of this guy. I didn't even Google him. I think I just was like, whatever.
It's like me with the Frauds, man. It's probably fine.
Yeah. And I was going to be in LA, so why not? And I drove over to his house, and man, we hit it off right away. And it was just in his living room. He had the same little getup I have, little recorder and a couple of mics, and you want to smoke a joint? Like, let's get high. Okay. And he turns on the thing, and we talk, and it's like, wow, that was fun. That was easy. That was just sitting here chatting with this guy who's a really smart, interesting, funny dude.
Right.
And then we went out for a beer, and he was like, dude, you should do a podcast. And I was like, well, what the fuck is a podcast?
Yeah. Anyway,
oh man, it's so easy now. You just buy this stuff, and it's a couple $100, and you meet all these interesting people, and I was like, I don't really need more confusion in my life, and learning how to edit sound files and shit.
Sounds like a whole fucking thing.
Yeah, but he had this guy who produced his, and he helped me. He just told me what to buy. I think he had like a preset list of things you can buy on Amazon, and he just emailed me that, and so I just bought the shit and started, because I do have interesting people around, and since the book came out, even more. And it was great. It's just like, it's like sitting down with either it's a friend, like someone like you that I know anyway. And it's like we're just sitting down for one of our normal, wide-ranging, crazy conversations, and we're inviting, 50,000 people to sit in and listen. Yeah. Or it, as you said, it gives you an excuse to reach out to somebody that you couldn't reach out to otherwise.
Right.
You can't write to some, like you had what's his name up in Washington. Schwartz, Stephen Schwartz.
Stephen Schwartz, right.
I mean, I couldn't just write to him and say, hey, you're interesting. Can I come by your house someday and, hang out for a couple hours?
Yeah.
What a weird thing to suggest. But if you've got a podcast,
suddenly it's official. You put a microphone in front of people
and they're doing something, productive.
Yeah.
They're not just sitting there wasting their time with some dipshit. Yeah.
What I gotta have 100 questions.
Can I say dipshit on your podcast?
I think you can say dipshit on your podcast. How did so for the listeners who either just got here from outer space or who've been living under a rock, you and your wife are the authors of Sex at Dawn, and I want to know. I've asked you this before. I interviewed you once when you came and spoke at our school, but how did the success of that book change your life? And the obvious kinds of money or notoriety, but I mean, were you prepared for how popular it was going to be? Did you know when it was done that we got something here that's going to shake? So because like Dan Savage said, it was the most important book on human sexuality since the Kinsey Report, right?
Yeah,
that's not a bad full quote.
No, it's pretty good. Pretty good quote. Obviously, by the time Dan Savage was reacting to it, then it was pretty clear that things, this was a rocket ship. But when I was first working on it, and there were different phases, right?
Yeah.
There was the phase where I had the idea and did my doctoral dissertation on this. And at that phase, I thought, if I'm right about this, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Because everybody else seems to be assuming things very differently. I mean, for those people who don't know about the book, the basic argument of the book is that humans are evolved to be a casually promiscuous species, sexually speaking, and that human sexuality has been co-opted over hundreds of thousands of years for social purposes that far outweigh reproduction in terms of the sort of motivation for sexual behavior. We have sex roughly 1,000 times per birth, whereas most mammals have sex about 12 times per birth.
Wow.
Most mammals only have sex when the female's ovulating, right? There's either a breeding period in spring, a brief period where all the fucking takes place,
right.
or there's a cycle. So most mammals are only having sex when it can lead to conception, and by far most mammalian sex is intercourse.
Yeah.
There aren't like a lot of hand jobs going on.
Not a lot of horse blowjobs.
No, no.
Unless a person's doing it up in Washington.
Yeah, zoo.
Yeah.
But human sexuality, it takes place when the females are already pregnant, when they're lactating, when they're postmenopausal, when, they're between two men, two women. I mean, we're doing all sorts of non-reproductive sexual behavior. And no one had really, to my knowledge, really explained human sexuality in a way that included that and showed why that is so important.
Yeah.
And still in the whole sort of Christian approach to sexuality is that sex is only for reproduction,
right.
and everything else is
and
immoral.
should not be enjoyed too much.
Right.
For a very long time, my background in religious studies, if in the Middle Ages, if a woman if she orgasmed, if she had an orgasm having sex with her husband, she had to go to confession. She had to go repent for coming. Repent
for pleasure.
Yeah, and the ironic thing is, obviously, a female orgasm increases the chance of impregnation, right? Because it lubricates the... Is that true?
Well...
You're the guy on this.
Yeah.
I don't even know what Baroque music is. I know even less about female orgasms, trust me.
They go together like...
well...
brownies and ice cream.
I'm faking my way through both, but go
ahead. Female orgasm does seem to have a reproductive payoff in the sense that it changes the pH of the woman's reproductive tract in a way that is more hospitable to sperm cells. So one theory is that female orgasm is a way for the woman to advantage a particular mate, even though she's had sex with several.
Oh, okay.
So maybe she's had sex with like two men, and then the third one she really likes, either because his pheromones trigger a certain response. I mean, often it has nothing to do with personality or looks or anything. It's a very chemical thing. And there's
or if the
lots
guy's a Lexus or anything like that.
Yeah, Rolex. Oh, I love that Rolex. Yeah, so it does seem to there are all sorts of mechanisms for that. But getting back to your question about how the phases of the book. So when I wrote the dissertation, I was like, okay, this could be an interesting idea, and maybe someday it could be a book. Second phase was, and I'm talking 10 years later. Cassie and I are together. We've traveled in Asia. We bought an apartment. We renovate the apartment, and the whole time I'm thinking about this idea, and I'm thinking like, yeah, when I get done with this and that and the other thing, maybe I should sit down and try to write something about that.
Yeah.
And so I started writing about it, and I had no contract, I had no agent, I had no connection to publishing at all. I was just trying to expand on these thoughts I'd had, and I'd been, during those years, I'd been like filling in gaps in my knowledge because I knew, like, it's one thing to convince 3 academics that this is good enough to give you a degree. It's another thing to publish a book that potentially lots of people are going to be reading, including experts in fields where you're saying, I think they're wrong.
Yeah, like people who study primates and stuff. Or
primatologists, sexologists, biologists, evolutionary theorists. anthropologists. I mean, there's a lot of people that you have to disagree with to come up with
invested in this book
being
basically
wrong.
saying their careers have been devoted to the wrong ideas.
Yeah. So I wanted to really bone up on some stuff. And
Nice.
yeah. So
I bet you did, Chris Ryan.
yeah. So then what happened was one night I was playing poker with a buddy, and his wife had worked in publishing. And I guess I lost all my money, so I was sitting there talking with her. And I had this idea that I would like to pitch the book to get it published the same year as the 150th anniversary of On the Origin of Species, which was 2009, because I knew there'd be all these Darwin celebrations, and I thought that might give me some advantage.
Yeah.
And she said, well, if you want to get it published next year, you got to get on the stick, because they need 8 months from the time. And I had no idea there was that huge.
You just thought.
I just thought I'll turn it in October. It'll be out in November.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so then I went home and I, got online and I found this website called Editors and Predators that has a list of like all the agents and editors who accept manuscripts.
Oh wow!
But it's like, oh, this guy's full of shit. He's just like stealing, because there's a lot of people in that world who are like, oh yeah, I'll get you published. Send me a check for $5,000 and I'll look at your work. And so it was like, who's legit, who's not, who has published in popular science, and who accepts email inquiries, query letters, right? So I made a list of 10 of those. And I put together a one-page query letter, like, here's who I am, here's the idea, here's why it's important and I think would sell. And I emailed that off, and I figured they're all going to say no, but some will say, no, but if, maybe if you thought more about this, and they'll give me some tips, and I'll keep refining it and down the road. So I sent off 20 of these things, and like 48 hours later, 17 of them have offered representation.
Wow.
It was insane.
That's
so
amazing.
That was a really that was the moment where it was like,
you're onto something.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
This could actually get published, And I mean, Cassie and I were so like pumped up. We didn't sleep for 3 days.
I bet.
We were just like, what? And we had this vacation planned we were going to go to the south of Spain, I think. Yeah, because we were thinking of moving to Andalusia. So we're going to go to the south of Spain, and this all happened, and we had like a week blocked out. So we just said, no, let's go to New York and meet these people, right? And so we canceled our trip, and we flew to New York, and next thing you know, we're meeting with all these big agencies, and people are taking us out to dinner and, telling us why they should represent us, because, trust me, I know so-and-so, and we did this book and that book, and, we know how to do a book like this. And it just completely flipped from no one will ever pay attention to like, well, I'm not sure you're the agency for us.
Here? Were you able to get them into a bidding war kind of thing? Or?
Well, not the agents, because the agents aren't offering you any money.
Get you the money from the publishing house. Yeah.
But like down the road, when we had chosen an agency, and then they were pitching it to the publishers. We didn't actually get a bidding war going. There were 3 publishers who were interested.
Yeah.
Oxford University Press, Basic Books, and HarperCollins. Yeah. And so it looked like there was going to be an auction, because all 3 of them were seriously interested. Like, several hour-long meetings, and like people are investing time. Senior editors are sitting down and really going through the ideas and, challenging this and that, and how are you going to deal with this and that. So they were very far along the process where they were going to make a bid. And the one guy from Basic Books, senior editor there, he said to me, we had this long talk on a Friday on the phone, and he said, okay, well, you can tell your agent I'm going to make a bid on Monday. We're very interested in this. I'm excited about this book. Yeah. Okay, so then Monday comes around, and, well, before that actually happened, Oxford University Press does this in-house review system where they are like the editors into it. So then as sort of a formality, they send out your proposal to 2 experts, who have some expertise in the area, to get their feedback. And So she sent it out to those two. The first one comes back, and I remember it said, and they're anonymous, right? It comes back, and it was like, this is like Jared Diamond, but better. Because it's about sex. And it's got that same like comprehensive reframing of something that everyone thinks they know, changes the way you look at the world. You guys should definitely publish this. It's going to be a bestseller, and go for it. And then the next one came back, and it said, these people don't know anything. These people have no clue what they're talking about.
So this was the beginning of that divide, right? Because that thing is repeated through the years.
It's continued right down to today, So, and the editor sent them on to me, They're anonymous, so I couldn't, yell and scream at anyone, but just to show me, like, this is what's happening. And she said, don't worry, this often happens. I'll send it to a third. It'll come back great, and we'll be all set. Sent it to a third, and the third was like, no, this is garbage.
Wow.
And she said, she was heartbroken. She was like, I'm so excited. I was so excited to publish this with you, but I can't make a bid.
Based on that.
And the crazy thing was that third one, the deciding vote, it was really interesting because the person said, I remember perfectly, they said there's no primate, living or dead, that has ever had a harem-based mating system. Because the sample chapter that was in this thing was about comparing other primate mating systems, and it was largely talking about gorillas, right? And how gorillas have tiny penises because it's a one adult male, and controls all the access to the females, and so the reproductive pressure isn't on the genitalia, it's on the male. That's why male gorillas are twice the size of females, but their genitalia is underdeveloped because there's no sperm competition. So it was that argument, and they said there is no, and it's like, the fucking gorilla. I mean, and I said to the editor, like, get your Encyclopedia of Primate Mating Systems, which is published by Oxford University Press. Look at pages 112 to 127. It talks about the harem-based mating system of the gorilla. So, like, this person is not only...
Don't baboons also do that, I thought?
Well, no, baboons do have male differential hierarchical ranking access to females, but it's not one male, 12 females, all the other adult males get out of here, which is what the gorilla system is. So I mean, so my point is, like, they've got this system, and the system determines everything, and they won't even like look up a fact that you can clearly show this person is full of shit.
Right.
Like, no. So they're out. So Oxford University Press is out, which is just as well, honestly.
Goddamn British.
Well, but it was their trade division. But still, I mean, the idea there was like having it published by Oxford University Press would give some sort of academic
gravitas to it. Yeah, of course.
But they would have priced it at $45 a copy, and we would have sold 10,000 copies, and nobody would have ever heard of it.
Right.
So, so then it was down to HarperCollins and Basic Books, and as I said, this guy from Basic Books was like, tell your agent Monday morning, whatever. Monday morning comes around, and my agent says, no, they're not making a bid.
Whoa.
I was like, what do you mean? The guy was like,
tell your agent.
Friday, like, tell her this is, and she said, yeah, I don't know. He just, he's not returning my calls and nothing. And I guess I had his email or something, and I wrote him an email, and I was like, what the fuck, dude?
Yeah.
And he called me, and he said, I'm not going to say his name, I remember his name, but he called me. He said, listen, I got to tell you, I've been working and publishing 35 years. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before. I'm a senior editor here. I have the right to say yes or no. I said yes. We had a meeting this morning, and the publisher, who's like the boss, right, said no. And I've never been vetoed by the publisher before.
Wow.
And then later I heard through the scuttlebutt that the publisher was a woman whose husband had recently left her for a younger woman.
Oh, wow.
And this is something that's come up. people's personal marital situation.
Yeah, they'll write you and say, my fucking husband read your book, or my wife read your book, and now she's sucking the neighbor's cock. And
Exactly.
Wow.
So it's a funny book. It's a weird publishing experience.
That's a pretty unique experience to elicit that kind of. Do you think it's just writing about sex in a way that isn't part of the accepted narrative that caused that? Why is that so controversial?
I think it's controversial partly because it's not part of this sort of standard narrative, which is the phrase we use in the book. But I think it's also particularly galling to some people because they know it's true.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like, it's like talking to a homophobe about how homosexuality isn't really a big deal. You get this like explosive reaction that tells you you're not having a rational conversation with someone, right?
Right.
Like if you really believed what you're saying,
you'd calm the fuck down a little bit.
Exactly. You wouldn't care if you published the book.
Exactly.
You'd say, well, okay, this will sell a lot. Why not? Who cares? If it's well written. No, you're saying no because some personal thing that you're experiencing, that you're expressing is manifesting in this. So I think the book, its success and also its the sort of the rage that it inspires is because it resonates with something that people feel.
Are you over? I mean, are you tired of being the sex guy? Are you tired of talking about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not
that. I mean, it's such an accomplishment, and I know you're happy with the accomplishment.
Sure.
And happy it still resonates
and grateful.
with people.
I'm grateful that people give a shit.
But it's like being the Eagles, and it's like, really, you want me to play Hotel California again? Jesus Christ! I mean, do you get to that? I mean, like, fuck, enough with this song. Like, all right, on a dog, Jesus Christ!
It's a good song, though.
Yeah, the testicles are this big. They're on the outside of the body.
It's true. Like, oh, monkey balls again.
Yeah, monkey balls again.
Here
Steady
we go.
diet of it. Do you have? I mean, you're working on the new book, and I want to ask you about that in a second. But have you had like fatigue on this? Because you're on like a 5-year book tour.
Yeah. Well, and I do a lot of media. I still do interviews. I mean, there's like a big profile apparently that's coming out in Playboy soon.
Right.
Now that there are no more naked girls, they'll talk about old
about?
White man.
That ruins that old joke. I only read Playboy for the articles.
That's all there is. Yeah. You better.
I'll still jerk off to your articles. That helps.
Thank you. That's touching. Yeah, I mean, on one level, yes, because you are sort of saying the same thing over and over again. But on other levels, well, it's a fascinating topic. So, thank God I didn't write a book about, polymers or,
right. Or shit pills.
Yeah, exactly.
People have to listen to the first hour of this conversation.
Right, exactly. To get the jokes.
Yeah.
But, if you're going to be an expert in something, that's a pretty good thing to be an expert in, I guess, right? Yeah. The second thing is... as I said, I'm really grateful that anybody gives a shit what I think about anything, and that I can actually make a living from it. At least for the moment.
Right. So why complain about?
So I'm not going to complain.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty fucking lucky place to be, and I'm very conscious of that. Right. But then when I pitched the second book, I thought, well, the natural follow-on to this is. Something that sort of takes this argument a little further in a different direction and whatever. And I talked to a couple of different, because I switched agents. And so I talked to some different agents, and they all said the same thing to me, which was, look, if you write another book about sex right now, that's great. I can sell it, no doubt. We'll get a publisher. But you're pretty much sealing your position as the sex guy. Yeah,
it's like you're now the male Dr. Ruth
from
here forward. But
exactly.
The sciencey one. Yeah.
Right. And that's fine. That's a good place to be.
Yeah.
But if you can do another big idea book that isn't the same thing, that isn't sex, then you're a big idea guy. Yeah. Then you're in there with Malcolm Gladwell and, those guys.
Yeah, Rushkoff, yeah.
Right. And then you can write about whatever you want, and it's because you're writing it that people are interested.
Right.
That's a very good, very special place to be, and you could get there if you could do another big idea
agent
book.
gave you that advice?
Several agents gave me that
that's good advice.
Yeah. It is good advice, but the problem is, like, I had maybe 4 or 5 ideas for books, right? Which I still have 4 or 5 ideas for books. And there was this one idea that's like, okay, I'll do a couple of these easier books, and then 10 years from now, I'll do another big idea book.
Yeah.
And they were all like, no, let's do the big idea book now.
Okay.
And I'm like, fuck, really?
Heavy lifting, yeah.
I'm so tired.
That's easy for them to say in an office. You
Yeah.
gotta go pull that off. Yeah, just like we can literally pull big ideas out of our asses, right?
Well, I mean, I had the idea,
idea.
and I had a lot of the research, because the book's not about sex, but it is about prehistory. It is about learning from prehistory and applying that to the modern world. So, there are a lot of parallels and a lot of the same, drawing from the same research. So in that sense, they're right. It's a good idea, and it's not that big a deal because I'm already steeped in the research.
Right.
But I definitely was up for something much shorter and easier.
Easier to pull off.
And also, it's a very different thing to write a book when you're sitting in an apartment in Barcelona and nobody knows who you are. Your wife goes, and she went to work every morning, and I would like take a nap and jerk off and write for an hour, and that was a big day for me.
Right.
That's very different from now, where I'm scheduling interviews, I'm doing the podcast every week, I'm feeding the Twitter monster, and you got to keep the platform fed.
In porn movies.
Starring in porn movies in a non-sex role.
For our guests that don't know, do you want to say you've been nominated?
Yeah, I was just nominated for an AVN award for the best non-sex performance in a porn movie.
For the movie Monogamish, right?
No, the movie's called Marriage 2.0.
Oh, right, about the advice counselor, right? The sex therapist that brings couples in. Isn't that what it's about, I thought?
No, it's
Not
about
that
a
I've
couple.
seen it 7 times or anything. Just for your scene, don't worry about it. It's not weird.
No, it's about a couple in San Francisco who are sort of having some issues in their relationship, and they decide to open up the relationship as a way to bring spice back in. And I think like one of them is feeling constricted, and so the other goes along with it, and so they go to these sex parties and they do the sort of stuff that some couples would do in San Francisco. And it's about the sort of trials and tribulations of opening your relationship.
I just realized this is the first conversation ever between 2 men about the plot of a porn. I don't know any guy that ever...
There aren't a lot of porn movies with plot.
Right, that might be why. What's the new book about? Civilized to Death.
Civilized to Death is about it's about sort of the effects of the false vision we have of prehistory and how that plays into what civilization actually is. Basically, what it's arguing is you've been lied to about what civilization is, how good it is. You've been lied to about how bad things were before civilization.
It's a way to justify civilization.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're misinformed both about where we are and about where we came from. So where we came from, everybody knows the phrase nasty, brutish, and short. Right? Before the state, this is Thomas Hobbes in 1651, I think, in Leviathan, he said, before the state, before there was this overriding authority of the state to keep everybody in line, human life was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Now, in English language, everybody's heard at least the last 3, right? And that's from 1651.
Wow.
Right? That's one of the most famous phrases in the English language. It's wrong. It's wrong on every count. Human life before agriculture, before the state, before civilization was not solitary at all. At all. Right now, about half the people in America live alone. Nobody's ever lived alone in a prehistoric society.
And the other half don't know the people that live next door to them.
Right.
I've lived in the same house for 10 years, and I don't know the name of the guy that I share a backyard with. Our backyards actually touch. We talk all the time. I couldn't tell you his first name.
And he's not going to lend you money.
Yeah.
Right.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
human life in prehistoric times was not solitary. It was not poor. Nobody was poor.
No.
Everything was shared.
No such thing as homelessness.
Right.
Yeah.
Poverty is a relative classification.
Right, so
Poverty
aggregate
is
as
when
well.
you have less than the guy next to you.
Right.
Right? But if the guy next to you has exactly the same you do, you share everything, you share food, you take care of each other's kids, you don't even know whose kids are whose.
Right.
That's not poor. Nobody's poor. And in fact, what you find just today, I was editing the section where an anthropologist says that you can predict the behavior of modern people by assuming that they'll behave as if they live in a world of scarcity. So they'll hoard, they'll fight over things, they'll lie and cheat to get what they think they need. Whereas you can predict the behavior of pre-agricultural people by assuming they live in a world of plenitude. They act as if they have it made, right?
Yeah.
So this plays out in so many different parts of life. It plays out with how we view the world.
Yeah.
Is the world a dangerous, scary place? Is nature bloody, red in tooth and claw, right? Or is nature a place that takes care of us and gives us what we need most of the time, right? So solitary, poor, nasty, I don't know what nasty really means, brutish, much more violence after the advent of agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the invention of kingship, the invention of war.
Exactly.
The invention of armies.
Despots. People in hunter-gatherer societies are what agriculturalists anthropologists refer to as fiercely egalitarian. Right? It's fierce egalitarianism is universal among foragers. What that means is not only that they consider everyone is considered to have equal status, not status like you could be a better hunter than me, you could be smarter than me, you could be better looking than me, but if you start
all
acting,
three true, by the way.
all are true. That's obvious examples. But if you start acting up, if you start acting like you're better than me, then you're going to have a problem, because that's not tolerated.
Right.
So anyone who seeks to be in a position of leadership is immediately disqualified from leadership.
Yeah.
Think about that, how different that is from the American political scene.
That's that old Robert Anton Wilson quote when they asked him, what's the first thing you would do if you were president? And he said, resign.
Yeah.
It's fucking brilliant.
It's perfect.
This goes back to Freud, right? I mean, because I don't agree with a lot of Freud, but even in Civilization, I heard you talking with Rogan about this, in Civilization and its Discontents, he makes the error, I think, at least with what you're saying with your new book, Where It's Going, in saying that mankind needs civilization to survive, but civilization will inevitably make us discontent.
Yeah.
And that I find fascinating, right? And so he's agreeing with you with that part, because he's saying civilization will very much make man, it will limit man's freedom and make man ultimately unhappy. It's just that we absolutely need it to survive. And you're challenging that first part.
Yeah.
We don't need it to survive at all, but you're agreeing with him on the second part, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, while you were talking, I just I pulled up Freud. Yeah, Freud saw civilization as the product of primordial urges having been contained, pressurized, and redirected away from their natural release.
Right, and this is what goes back to your work on sexuality.
Exactly, right, yeah. Here, this is from Civilization and Its Discontents. Freud says, mankind is proud of its exploits and has a right to be, but men are beginning to perceive that all this newly won power over space and time, this conquest of the forces of nature, this fulfillment of age-old longings, has not increased the amount of pleasure they can obtain in life, has not made them feel any happier.
There it is.
There it is. That's Freud. And what do we gain by a long life when it is full of hardship and starved of joys and so wretched that we can only welcome death as our deliverer? Right?
Jesus.
I mean, that's a good fucking question, right?
Yeah.
And that gets back to Louis C.K. and his bit. So this book is called Civilized to Death, and the subtitle I want to use, if my publisher will let me, is Why Everything's Amazing But Nobody's Happy, which is a line from Louis C.K. bit.
Yeah.
That thing where he's in the airplane and the Wi-Fi goes off and the guy's like,
"You're
oh,
in a
this is
chair in the
bullshit."
sky.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, but the back doesn't go.
Yeah, you and I had a conversation once about like a harbor seal or something, and you were saying, people say, oh, it's so horrible, they only live to be 30 years old. And you were going, I don't know, man.
Oh,
you
no,
lay around,
no, okay.
what was that bit?
I actually was just editing that section because I include that conversation in the book here. So what I'm talking about there is the last of Hobbes' elements, short, right? Everybody says, when I have this conversation, what I always get from people is like, well, yeah, but man, we live twice as long as we used to, dude, so fuck off, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, we don't. That's the thing. Yeah. We don't. Pre-agricultural people lived into their 70s, 80s, and even 90s. Our species is evolved, our modal lifespan is 75 to 82 years. Yeah. So if you say, oh, well, how long does a dog live? Well, 12 to 15 years, right? How long does a cat live? 15 to 20 years. How long does a human live? 75 to 82 years. Right. Okay? Now, do a lot of kittens die young? Yes, they do, right? Whether it's because someone's flushing them down the toilet or their mother eats them or it's just a cruel, cruel world and a fucking hawk comes down and eats them. But you don't include them in the calculation when you're saying how long cats live. Right. But with humans, we do that. Yeah. So there is a lot of infant mortality. Yeah. Right. So all this shit, this is super political, right? Because this is all about justifying the present, and it's about justifying the necessity and legitimacy of the state. Yeah. And religion and other institutional controls over your behavior.
I'm a big fan of that show, The Walking Dead. I really like it, but but lately I've been thinking about it, and I've been thinking, I don't know if you watch it, but one of the things I think is really interesting about it is it presents the exact opposite argument you're making. It says the best of all possible worlds is the civilization we currently have, and if it goes away, what we're left with is utter chaos and people eating each other and people killing each other and that there's some kind of dystopian Mad Max thing awaiting us, and the high watermark is things as they are now. If we can only get back to Xbox and McDonald's and all of the shit that we currently have, and so much so that the only recognized authority figure in the show is the police officer, this cop. Even in this new fucked up world, it's the cop that's going to keep you safe, right? And so there's still this authority figure, right, that is keeping everybody going. Right? Yeah. But the show doesn't present any alternative. There's no better world coming. There's no better possibility. It's just modern civilization or chaos and discord.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of that. I mean, there are so many. Once I started thinking of things in these terms, then suddenly almost everything breaks down into forager versus hunter-gatherer, egalitarian versus hierarchical, small scale, intimate, everyone knows each other versus large, mass scale, institutional control.
I became interested in your work in this Paleolithic stuff and in hunter-gatherer stuff, looking back into prehistory for clues for the modern world. It's exactly the kind of thing I do in religious studies, right? And looking back at Paleolithic cave art, for instance, but looking back at some of these early civilizations or pre-civilizations, these early settlements. We've talked about Çatalhöyük and Göbekli, even though Göbekli's not a settlement, it was just used for religious purposes. Right?
Yeah, they didn't find any food or
Çatalhöyük was lived in, and what you find in these places is all the graves are exactly the same size, all the houses are exactly the same size. The chief maybe has a slightly bigger, there'll be a little extra room added for when he has gatherings. Everyone comes to the chief's house to listen to some pronouncement or something. But other than that, everyone's graves are the same size. We don't have any pictures in the Paleolithic and Neolithic of people fighting each other in large numbers. Yeah. And so this shift happens 7,000 BC in Sumer, right? When all of these things start to change, and it comes with large-scale agriculture.
Right. And
that's when sexuality changes, because as soon as there's wealth to protect, then suddenly family lines and kingships and the offspring become very important, because
women lose status.
They need to protect the horde. Right.
Yeah, this is my property. I want to make sure my kids have it, and so the only way to make sure of that is to control who the
woman in the tower. Right. And then literature for 1,500 years becomes obsessed with cheating women. Yeah. Right. There's from whether you're reading Chaucer or Shakespeare or Gilgamesh or anything, or the Iliad and the Odyssey, there's this obsession with cheating wives. Yeah. It's the worst possible thing that can happen.
And it's still right up till today, where women get stoned to death for having been raped. Yeah. It's like, oh, you're useless to me now. Another man's seed has entered you. Yeah. Like, Jesus Christ, we're still thinking that way, Come on. Yeah, so the seals, you asked about the seals.
yeah.
So the thing about the seals is, so I'm watching this nature program with Cassie, and it's one of these BBC things. There's a seal frolicking in the wave, and then, it's like, oh, the happy seals, and then you see the shadow.
Yeah.
And do-do-do,
Yeah.
and do-do-do, right? And then it's the great white, comes out and it grabs the seal, and it throws the seal up in the air, and then it's amazing because then it's got the seal in its teeth, and you can see those shark teeth,
Yeah.
And they slow down the video to 1/40th of the normal time, so that you can see the terror in the seal's eyes, and you can see the tail flapping as it is consumed, and the blood in the water, and,
Jesus,
right? And then the narration is like, the struggle for existence is never over in the natural world, and
again, the seal fought to the end, just like that pancreatic cancer,
So I was thinking, like, okay, what they're saying here is like this. The life of natural animals is incredibly stressful. Every day is a desperate struggle to make it till tomorrow. But I've seen seals, and they look pretty chill.
Yeah, they're laying the fuck around.
They're laying around on rocks. They're always hanging out with friends. They're always like,
they're chatting.
Or they're swimming around in the water where they're fast, and they're eating fresh fish. And I mean, I've always thought a seal's life is a pretty good life. So I looked up, so I figured out what kind of seal this was. It's a harbor seal, and I looked it up, and harbor seals live about 30 to 35 years on average. And then I was like, so this seal, let's say the seal was in its prime. Let's say it was 25 years old, okay? 25 years of having a good time, eating good food,
on the beach,
laying around, like literally on the beach, like what we do on a good weekend, right?
Yeah.
And then you die suddenly, unexpectedly, in about a second.
Fraction of a second,
right?
Because that shark hits it.
Yeah, and then it's done. And there's this massive relief of endorphins in prey animals when a predator gets a hold of them.
Yeah.
So that seal was probably, not only was it a quick and merciful death, it was probably high as hell.
Yeah.
Right? And they're holding that up to us and saying, oh, aren't we lucky that we don't live in the natural world? Now, I know old people who have been hooked up to machines in hospitals, suffering, waiting, desperately wishing to die for months, if not years, but we won't let them because we're so fucking afraid of death. They're suffering way more than a whole fucking pod of seals ever suffer.
And forget that. I mean, you ever been in a DMV? Jesus Christ, it's way more suffering than anybody needs to fucking.
Exactly.
No seal should be
just
subject.
Like flying on Thanksgiving weekend. I mean, come on.
So the premise of the book is that this lie that civilization is the best of all possible things. And, it's a technology. It's a thing we invented for a purpose.
Well, I even say it's not a thing we invented.
Okay.
It's a thing that invented us.
Okay,
it's a thing that invented. I think that civilization is a superorganism.
Okay.
And
that's interesting.
Institutions are superorganisms, and they create propaganda to justify themselves and to perpetuate themselves, as any system does, right? And so they downplay the costs, they over sell the benefits, and they promise an amazing future that's just around the corner. Fucking jetpacks and sex robots and whatever it is you want, it's almost here, man.
Join us for the second hour of OTB Radio